When we got back, Muriel noticed the door was open.
There's something about Heartbeat that feels like a warm memory. A series that began in 1992, set in the rolling hills and quiet corners of 1960s North Yorkshire, yet somehow managed to speak to generations far beyond its era. With the sound of classic rock and the clatter of a village police station, Heartbeat wasn't just a TV drama. It was a time capsule. It made you feel like you knew the people of Aidensfield, like you'd had a pint at the Aidensfield Arms, or shared a knowing glance with P.C. Ventress as another one of Greengrass's schemes fell apart. But behind the cozy village charm, the witty banter, and the vintage cars lies a deeper, more bittersweet story, one that isn't often told. Because as the years rolled on, the actors who brought this world to life slowly began to leave us. One by one, they slipped away, taking with them stories full of triumph, tragedy, and in some cases, secrets never fully revealed. This is not just a tribute. This is an exploration. Who were these actors, beyond the uniforms, the funeral homes, the village doctor's surgery? What drove them? What haunted them? What lit their path to stardom? And what ultimately marked their final days? There were careers that rose and fell like waves. There were personal battles fought away from the cameras, scandals that rippled through the tabloids, friendships forged on set, and lives that took turns even the best scriptwriter couldn't have imagined. Some of these actors passed quietly, their names whispered in remembrance. Others left amidst headlines and mystery. Were the stories behind the faces we saw every Sunday evening? Who were the real people behind Oscar Blaketon, Claude Greengrass, and Bernie Scripps? And more hauntingly, what are they doing now? Join us as we walk through memory lane, dust off old scripts, and bring to light the hidden chapters of the lives behind Heartbeat. And don't forget, if you want more untold stories of cinema's familiar faces, hit that subscribe button and stay with us till the very end, because this is going to be one hell of a story. Meet Derek Fowles, the man who traded Whitehall's political snakes for Aidensfield's petty criminals. As Sergeant Oscar Blaketon, he played the ultimate hardest with a heart. But off-duty, the actor they called the Quiet One was boiling over with rage and regret. Asterisk, Fowles was 55 when Heartbeat began, a former comedy star desperate to be taken seriously. But here's what cameras missed: his explosive temper during Season 5 reshoots, when producers forced him to wear a padded uniform to hide sudden weight loss. The reason? A then-secret cancer diagnosis he'd hidden for years. Asterisk, notice the padding? That's not a TV cop cliché. That's a man fighting for his life while the show marched on. And when he finally went public in 1998, Heartbeat wrote his illness into the script like some cheap plot twist. No wonder Fowles quit 2 years later, calling the role a gilded cage. Asterisk, and he did barely. When Fowles died in 2020 at 82, Heartbeat had been off air for a decade. No reunion, no farewell episode. Just a quiet funeral where his yes. Minister co-stars outnumbered Heartbeat's cast. The ultimate irony? The man who played a rule enforcer spent his final years raging against the industry's cruelty. Asterisk. But if you think that's dark, wait until you hear about Bill Maynard's real-life crimes. Asterisk. Let's start with the man who outlasted them all. William Simons, the beloved P.C. Ventress. For 18 seasons, he was the twinkle-eyed backbone of Aidensfield's police force. But behind that grandfatherly smile, a lifetime of battles the cameras never saw. Asterisk. Born in 1940, Simons was already a seasoned actor when Heartbeat began, but fame came late. At 52, he landed Ventress, a role that should have been his golden years. Instead, whispers followed him. The stress of typecasting. The pressure of being the last original cast member as co-stars quit or died around him. Asterisk. And then there was the pain he hid. In 2019, at 78, Simons died peacefully, so said the press. But insiders knew the truth. Years of arthritis had left him struggling to stand during those iconic pub scenes. Ever notice how Ventress leaned on the bar? That wasn't acting. Yet he never complained. Not when the scripts got weaker. Not when Heartbeat became a shadow of itself. He stayed because the fans loved him, Because Aidensfield was home. And that loyalty? That's why his death hit harder than any other. But here's the real tragedy. Simons lived just long enough to see Heartbeat canceled and forgotten by the networks that made it. Tonight, we remember him, not just as Ventress, but as the man who gave everything to a show that gave him back pain and a pension. Up next, ladies and gentlemen, meet the only Heartbeat actor with an Oscar nomination, Freddie Jones, the legendary thespian who brought John Merrick's agony to life in The Elephant Man. And here's how British television rewarded that genius. By having him play senile old George Woodford, who spent his entire storyline forgetting where he put his damn teeth. At 65, freshly bankrupt from a vicious divorce, Jones took the role for one reason: survival. The producers knew it. Watch his early episodes. That's not acting when George stares blankly at his pension money. That's a broken man realizing his chariots of fire residuals are gone. The cruelty was methodical. They cut Jones' dialogue when his memory faltered. They filmed his shaking hands for authenticity. And when he dared complain, not a single cast member attended the funeral. The show that milked his decline for ratings couldn't spare a flower arrangement. But here's the real kicker. His Elephant Man prosthetics sold at auction for £70,000, while his Heartbeat scripts moldered in a landfill. This wasn't just a TV series. Now let's talk about the man who didn't need to act to play a lovable rogue, because Bill Maynard was Claude Jeremiah Greengrass, the cheeky chappie who stole your heart and allegedly your wallet. Years before Heartbeat, Maynard faced 42 counts of fraud. The charge? Swindling investors in a fake property scheme. The penalty? A slap on the wrist and a standing ovation when he returned to TV. Because Britain loves a scoundrel, especially one with twinkling eyes and a harmless old man act. But here's what's not funny. By season 7, Maynard was stealing scenes and struggling to remember lines. In 2000, he suffered a stroke so severe, producers had to write Greengrass out overnight. The farewell episode? The eulogies called him a national treasure. Not one mentioned the £50,000 in unpaid court fines still haunting his estate. Peter Benson played Aidensfield's gentle Undertaker Bernie scripts for 13 years. But when his own final curtain call came in 2018, the show that made him famous didn't even send flowers. Asterisk, here's the truth they buried. By the time Benson filmed his last scenes in 2008, the 63-year-old actor was already battling severe COPD, a lung condition that left him gasping between takes. Why'd he keep working? Because unlike the cozy fantasy of Heartbeat, British TV doesn't provide health care for its aging stars. Asterisk, that wasn't a character choice. It was because Benson couldn't stand for more than 30 seconds without his oxygen levels crashing. The producer's solution? He got less recognition than one of Bernie's fictional funerals. The cruelest joke? In his final years, Benson took any role he could get, including playing corpses. The Undertaker had become the deceased, and the industry that used him up, it just moved on to the next body. Speaking of bodies, our next story involves a real-life doctor who couldn't save himself. Francis Matthews wasn't just Heartbeat's suave Dr. Alway. He was British horror's original Scream King. The man who once played Dracula's nemesis spent his final years handing out aspirin in Aidensfield. How does a legend become a footnote? Buckle up. At 74 when he joined Heartbeat, Matthews was already a walking relic. The producers thought they'd hired class. What they got? A bitter alcoholic who'd show up reeking of gin, confusing his lines with Shakespearean monologues from his glory days. His abrupt exit after just 2 seasons wasn't creative differences. It was intervention. The man who once sparred with Christopher Lee was found passed out in his dressing room, still wearing his doctor's coat. Heartbeat solution? Replace it with a younger model before the body was cold. Asterisk, when Matthews died at 86, not one Heartbeat co-star attended the funeral. The show that killed his career didn't even send a card. The final insult? His Dracula co-stars had to crowdfund his headstone. Asterisk, but if you think that's humiliating, wait until you hear how the industry treated our next star like literal livestock. Jeffrey Hughes didn't just play a drunk. He lived the part. As Vernon Scripps, the lovable mechanic with a perpetual beer in hand. Audiences laughed at his slurred one-liners and wobbly walks home. But behind the scenes, that wasn't acting. Asterisk. Long before Heartbeat, Hughes was British TV royalty. His turn as Coronation Street's Eddie Yates made him a household name. But by the time he joined Aidensfield in 2001, the 57-year-old actor was already fighting and losing a decades-long war with alcoholism. Asterisk. Notice how Vernon was always slightly delayed? Crew members whispered about Jeff's liquid lunches and scenes that had to be res-hot when he couldn't stand straight. The producer's solution? They wrote his drinking into the character. Life imitating art, imitating life in the saddest possible way. Asterisk. When Hughes died at just 68, the press called it a long illness. Those who knew him understood the truth. His final years were spent in and out of rehab, his fortune gone, his health destroyed by the very thing that once made him famous, his ability to play the happy drunk. Asterisk. That's the tragedy of Geoffrey Hughes. He made alcoholism look charming right up until the moment it killed him. And Heartbeat? They just kept pouring him another pint and rolling camera. But if you think that's heartbreaking, wait until you hear how the show treated death in real life. Frank Middlemass didn't just play Heartbeat's original village doctor. He was the only actor who could have saved his own character. Because in real life, he'd been a licensed physician before turning to acting. Trained at Edinburgh University. Served in World War II as a combat medic. So why was this brilliant man reduced to spouting soap opera diagnoses in 1992? The answer says everything about how Britain treats its artists and its elderly. At 73, when Heartbeat began, Middlemass was already the oldest main cast member. But here's what the scripts hid. His hands shook so badly from Parkinson's, the props department glued stethoscopes to his neck to hide the tremors. Those long shots of him examining patients, they were covering for the fact he could barely hold a syringe. When Middlemass died in 2006 at 87, the show didn't kill off Ferrenby. They just stopped mentioning him. No funeral, no tribute. After saving Aidensfield for 4 seasons, erased like a mistaken prescription. But the replacement doctor had demons even Heartbeat couldn't cure. Let's talk about Stuart Golland, the man who made Aidensfield's pub feel like home. As lovable landlord George Ward, he poured pints and wisdom in equal measure. But here's the bitter truth hiding in the bottom of the glass. Notice the tremor? That wasn't acting. By 1992, Golland, then just 47, was already battling the early stages of multiple sclerosis. The producers knew. They exploited it, turning his worsening symptoms into George's funny old man shuffle. Season after season, they made his real deterioration into a punchline. That comic moment George spills ale down a customer's shirt, Golland's fingers had lost feeling days earlier. The episode where he pretends to forget orders? Early MS cognitive fog. The ultimate betrayal came in 1995, when Golland finally confessed he could no longer stand for full shoots. Heartbeat didn't offer medical leave. They killed George off in a single throwaway line, gone to live in Whitby, while recycling his apron for the new barmaid. Asterisk, when Golland died 8 years later at just 58, the show that milked his illness for ratings didn't even pause filming. No tribute episode. No on-screen dedication. Just an empty barstool where a dying man once pretended his agony was entertainment. Asterisk, and the cruelest twist? His on-screen daughter kept serving drinks in his pub, while his real daughter was suing the NHS for malpractice. Asterisk, let's talk about Harry Beattie, or, as the Heartbeat call sheets called him, Old Drunk Farmer number 3. For 7 seasons, you laughed as his character, Joseph, stumbled out of the Aidensfield arms, tripped over chickens, and slurred his way through punchlines. But here's the truth that'll stick in your throat like cheap whiskey. Asterisk. Every slurred word, real. Every stumble, unscripted. That lovable drunk act was actually an elderly actor's undiagnosed Parkinson's disease being exploited for ratings. While audiences chuckled at his performance, Beattie was fighting to remember his own address between takes. Asterisk. Notice how Joseph was always seated by season 4? That's because 78-year-old Beatty could no longer stand without assistance. See how he constantly held a mug? The prop team filled it with foam because real liquid would shake out of his trembling hands. And that iconic drunken walk? A 79-year-old man trying not to collapse from muscle rigidity. Asterisk. When Beatty finally left the show in 1999, there was no farewell party. No gold watch. Just a production assistant handing him his coat and muttering, "Try not to die before we finish post-production." 2 years later, he did exactly that, alone in a council flat. His heartbeat residuals long since spent on caretakers. Asterisk. Here's the kicker. When Beatty's family asked for his costume as a keepsake, the producers charged them £150 for props rental. The same week, they auctioned Claude Greengrass' jacket for charity. Priorities. Which brings us to Freddie Jones, an Oscar-caliber actor reduced to this. But that's a tragedy even Heartbeat couldn't cheapen with a laugh track. And so we say goodbye to Aidensfield. Not the picture-perfect village we remember from Sunday evenings, but the real one, where the cobblestones were plywood, the laughter was scripted, and the ghosts still linger in empty dressing rooms. For 18 years, Heartbeat gave us the comforting illusion of a simpler time. But behind the vintage cars and cozy pub banter, it was just another factory, one that consumed brilliant actors and spit out nostalgia until the gears finally ground to a halt. Maybe that's why we loved it. Not because it was true, but because we needed it to be. Needed to believe in a place where bobbies were kind, rogues were harmless, and nobody really died. Just moved to Whitby. Rest in peace to the ones who made the magic real. The show may be fiction, but their sacrifices weren't. And if you listen closely on Quiet Yorkshire Nights, you can still hear the echo of that iconic theme tune, playing just for them.